After all investigations, it was as if a ghost had entered the house, committed the atrocities, and vanished into thin air. All they knew was that the killer had struck with methodical brutality, and that they might strike again.
I'd like to direct my statement to the court and not to the murderer. Some people may call him an animal, but I won't, because I think animals have a purpose in this world.
On this icy January night in 1984, Aurora, Colorado, was blanketed in silence. Inside a modest suburban home, the Bennett family, Bruce, Deborah, Melissa, and little Vanessa, enjoyed the warmth of their safe haven. Bruce, just 27, was a former Navy man building a career in business. Deborah, 26, had a heart full of love for her daughters. 7-year-old Melissa, full of life and curiosity, and 3-year-old Vanessa, a giggling toddler learning new words every day. The evening was uneventful, just like countless others. Maybe they played a board game or read bedtime stories. It was the kind of night families take for granted, wrapped in the comfort of routine. But little did they know, someone was lurking in the shadows, a predator driven by unspeakable intent. This makes me wonder how fragile safety can be. The following morning, the Bennett's neighbors noticed something odd. The usually lively house was eerily silent. No car starting, no cheerful good mornings, and no signs of activity. It was strange enough for one neighbor to knock on the door. There was no response. Curious, but hesitant, they peeked through the windows. The scene inside stopped them cold. Broken glass sparkled on the carpet. Furniture was overturned. Shadows of chaos painted the walls. Something was terribly wrong. They immediately called the police, setting off an investigation that would haunt Colorado for decades. Hold on a second. This story isn't just random murder story. This is a compilation of lessons, safety measures, suspicion, tragedy, and an absolute call for awareness. Do you think you'd trust your instincts if you noticed something strange at a neighbor's house? Let us know in the comments. Share this tragic story with your loved ones to keep them alert for safety, and subscribe for more gripping stories as we uncover them every day on this channel.
I didn't just lose my parents and sister. I lost trust in people. I lost my dignity and my pride. I lost the person who I was supposed to be. I lost my sanity.
When police arrived at the Bennett home, they braced themselves for the unknown. The front door creaked open to reveal a scene straight out of a nightmare. Blood spattered the walls and floor, telling a silent story of chaos and violence. Officers moved cautiously through the house, the air heavy with dread. They found Bruce first, his lifeless body at the bottom of the staircase. He had fought fiercely to protect his family, evident from the defensive wounds on his arms. Upstairs, they discovered Deborah, brutally attacked in her bedroom. Next to her was Melissa, her small body bearing the unimaginable cruelty of the night. Finally, in another room, 3-year-old Vanessa was found alive, but barely. She had been left severely injured, clinging to life in a house that now seemed haunted by evil. Can you imagine surviving something like this? What would you do next? As the news of the Bennett murder spread, shockwaves rippled through Aurora. The brutality was unprecedented, and fear began to seep into the hearts of residents. The police were under immense pressure to find the person responsible, but the crime scene raised more questions than answers. The weapon, a claw hammer, was left behind, its handle smeared with blood. Fingerprints, shoe prints, and DNA samples were collected, but this was 1984, and forensic science was still in its infancy. Detectives worked tirelessly, interviewing neighbors, friends, and anyone who might have seen or heard something. But there were no witnesses, no clear motive. It was as if a ghost had entered the house, committed the atrocities, and vanished into thin air. All they knew was that the killer had struck with methodical brutality, and that they might strike again. If you find this case chilling, hit that like button and subscribe for the next part of the story. As investigators dug deeper, They realized the Bennett murders weren't an isolated incident. Days earlier, another brutal crime had shaken the nearby community of Lakewood. Patricia Smith, a 50-year-old grandmother, had been beaten to death in her home. The similarities were undeniable. Both crimes involved a claw hammer and showed no signs of forced entry. Was this the work of a serial killer? Panic swept across the region as the possibility sank in. The police doubled their efforts, but the trail was cold. Fear gripped families, and many began to take extra precautions, locking doors, installing alarms, and looking over their shoulders. The killers seemed to strike without warning, targeting ordinary families in their own homes. And yet, for years, there was no justice for Patricia, the Bennetts, or their shattered communities. How safe do you feel in your own home? Has something like this ever happened where you live? Let's discuss it in the comments. Months turned into years, and the Bennett case remained unsolved. Despite the tireless efforts of investigators, leads dried up. The community moved on, but the scars of the crime lingered. For the surviving members of the Bennett family, life would never be the same. Vanessa, the only survivor, endured a long road to recovery, both physically and emotionally. Her childhood was stolen that night, replaced by pain and trauma. Her resilience was remarkable, but the absence of her family was a wound that time couldn't heal. Meanwhile, detectives couldn't shake the feeling that the killer was still out there. They kept the case files open, hoping for a breakthrough. Little did they know, technology would one day change everything. Don't miss the twist that finally cracked this case. Subscribe now to stay updated. Vanessa Bennett was just 3 years old when her life changed forever. She had survived, but at a cost unimaginable to anyone. Her tiny body bore the brutal marks of that night. A broken jaw, skull fractures, and injuries so severe they defied comprehension. But the physical scars weren't the worst part. As she grew, Vanessa grappled with the weight of a tragedy she couldn't fully understand. What kind of person could do this? Why was her family taken from her? These questions would haunt her for years. Relatives stepped in to care for Vanessa, but no one could replace the love and warmth of her parents and sister. Every milestone she reached, a first day of school, a birthday, or a holiday, came with a painful reminder of the family she'd lost. How do you think Vanessa found the strength to keep going? While Vanessa struggled to rebuild her life, the monster who had destroyed her family roamed free. The killer moved on, living among unsuspecting neighbors, blending into society. It's terrifying to think someone capable of such horror could disappear so easily. And yet, for decades, that's exactly what happened. Every day, detectives revisited the case, hoping new evidence or advancements in technology would lead to answers. But time and again, their efforts ended in frustration. Meanwhile, the Bennett murders faded from the headlines, becoming another unsolved tragedy. The community of Aurora tried to heal, but the fear lingered. Was the killer still in Colorado? Could they strike again? If stories like this make you question how justice works, hit the subscribe button for more haunting true crime cases. In 2018, more than 3 decades after the murders, a breakthrough came from an unlikely source: forensic genealogy. Detectives had preserved DNA evidence from the crime scene, but technology in the 80s couldn't make sense of it. Now, with advancements in science, they had a chance. Using a national database, investigators ran the DNA sample again, and this time, they got a match. The name Alex Christopher Ewing emerged. He was already behind bars, serving time for a brutal 1984 attack in Nevada. The shock was immediate. Could it really be him? Detectives pored over the evidence. The DNA wasn't just a match. It was an undeniable proof. After years of silence, the pieces were finally falling into place. Can you imagine the relief of finally getting answers after so long? Alex Ewing had been a ghost for years, his crimes buried in the past. But with the DNA evidence linking him to the Bennett murders, his time was up. Extradited to Colorado, Ewing faced the consequences of his actions. When news of his arrest broke, it reignited the pain and anger of the Bennett tragedy. People who had lived in fear for years finally had a face to put to the horror. In court, Ewing showed no remorse, no acknowledgement of the lives he'd destroyed. But the evidence against him was overwhelming, and the walls of justice were closing in. This story is far from over. Stay with us to hear how justice was finally served and why he murdered a whole family in one dark night. The courtroom was filled with tension as Alex Ewing's trial for the Bennett murders began. Survivors, relatives, and members of the community who had been haunted by this case for decades came seeking justice. The prosecution laid out a devastating case, meticulously piecing together the horror of that night in 1984. They presented DNA evidence as the undeniable link.
He has been and always will be the monster.
Emotional scars run much deeper than the visible scars.
Blood found at the scene matched Ewing's, leaving no room for doubt. Witnesses described his violent tendencies and prior crimes, painting a chilling
I'd like to
picture of a
direct my
man
statement
driven
to the
by
court
brutality.
and not
As
to the
details of the attacks were recounted,
murderer.
the courtroom fell silent,
Some
the
people
weight
may
of the
call him
tragedy
an animal,
pressing on
but
everyone
I won't.
present. Vanessa,
Because
now
I
an
think
adult,
animals have
sat
a purpose
quietly
in
among
this
the
world.
crowd, her presence a stark reminder of the lives shattered by Ewing's actions. For her, this wasn't just about justice. It was about finally confronting the monster who had stolen her family. What would you say to someone like Vanessa if you had the chance? Vanessa Bennett became a symbol of resilience. As she took the stand to speak about the impact of that horrific night, her voice was steady, but her pain was palpable. She described the lifelong battle with trauma, the physical scars that remained, and the emotional toll of losing her family. Her testimony was powerful, a raw and heartbreaking account of survival. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as she spoke, her words cutting through any doubts about the magnitude of Ewing's crimes. For Vanessa, this wasn't just about reliving the past. It was about reclaiming her future. Her courage moved everyone in the room. Many wiped tears as they listened to her describe what it meant to grow up without her parents, her sister, and the safety of her childhood. Stories like Vanessa's show us the strength of the human spirit. If you're inspired by her bravery, please share this video to spread the word and reach anyone possible out there in Vanessa's situation right now. The prosecution's case against Alex Ewing was airtight. They methodically unraveled the timeline of his crimes, tying him not only to the Bennett murders, but also to the killing of Patricia Smith days earlier. The similarities were dead obvious. The claw hammer, the brutality, the lack of forced entry. Expert witnesses explained how forensic genealogy had traced Ewing's DNA back to the crime scenes. Jurors were shown graphic evidence, a stark reminder of the horror unleashed on innocent families. Ewing's prior conviction in Nevada for a near-fatal hammer attack on a couple only strengthened the case. Prosecutors argued that he was a predator who had left a trail of destruction in his wake. As the details unfolded, the jurors' expressions told the story. They were horrified, captivated, and convinced of Ewing's guilt. What do you think drives someone to commit such unspeakable acts? Please let us know your thoughts in the comments. Ewing's defense team faced an uphill battle. With DNA evidence as damning as it was, their arguments felt thin and desperate. They attempted to cast doubt on the handling of evidence over the decades, questioning whether contamination or human error could have occurred. But forensic experts were prepared for such challenges. They explained the meticulous process of preserving and testing the evidence, leaving little room for skepticism. The defense also pointed to Ewing's previous conviction, arguing that his incarceration should have ruled him out as a suspect for the Bennett murders. Still, the jury wasn't buying it. The weight of the evidence and the sheer brutality of the crimes were impossible to ignore. It was becoming clear that the scales of justice were tipping heavily against Alex Ewing. Justice is within reach, but what's next? It was the moment everyone in the courtroom had been waiting for, yet dreading at the same time. After weeks of trial, the evidence was undeniable, and Alex Ewing finally cracked. His confession was as haunting as the crimes themselves. Ewing described that fateful January night in 1984 with an unnerving lack of emotion. He recounted watching the Bennett home for days, noting their routine, their vulnerability. When he saw the lights go out, he decided it was time. He broke into the house through a window, moving silently through the dark. The family never saw him coming. First, he attacked Bruce Bennett, who had woken to protect his family. The fight was brief, but brutal. Ewing overpowered Bruce, delivering fatal blows with the hammer he had brought with him. Then he turned to Deborah Bennett. Her screams woke their 7-year-old daughter, Melissa, who ran to her mother's side. Ewing's words became chillingly specific. He described the cold efficiency with which he silenced both mother and child. Their pleas for mercy were ignored, replaced by the sound of his hammer, striking repeatedly. The most harrowing part of his confession was his account of finding 3-year-old Vanessa. He said he didn't plan to leave anyone alive, but for reasons even he couldn't explain, he stopped short of killing her. Instead, he left her for dead, assuming she wouldn't survive her injuries. Can you imagine hearing these details as a family member? What would you do if you were in their shoes? Ewing's confession painted a horrifying picture of that night. Bloodstains marked every room he entered, and the once warm family home was transformed into a nightmarish crime scene. Investigators later confirmed that his description of the attack matched the evidence perfectly. The claw hammer, found at the scene, bore Bruce and Deborah's blood. Fingerprints matched Ewing's, and the trail of destruction left behind told the story of a man consumed by violence. Prosecutors showed photos of the crime scene to the jury, which drew audible gasps from the courtroom. Vanessa's tiny bedroom bore the marks of Ewing's vicious attack, a chilling reminder of her miraculous survival. The jury was left to grapple with the unthinkable, the deliberate annihilation of a family. And yet, Ewing expressed no remorse, no apology, no regret. When the jury returned with their verdict, the air in the courtroom was electric with anticipation. After hearing every gruesome detail, they had no doubt about Ewing's guilt. The foreperson stood and announced, "Guilty on all counts." Bruce, Deborah, and Melissa's names were spoken aloud in the courtroom as the charges were read, a sobering reminder of the lives lost. Relief swept over the Bennett family's surviving relatives. Vanessa, now an adult, wiped tears as the weight of decades of pain began to lift. For the community, this moment was bittersweet. Justice had come, but it could never undo the damage caused by Ewing's monstrous actions. Do you think justice is enough to heal wounds this deep? The judge's voice was steady as he delivered Alex Ewing's fate, 3 consecutive life sentences. Ewing would spend the rest of his days behind bars, unable to harm anyone ever again. The courtroom erupted in a mix of tears and applause. For Vanessa, this was a step toward closure, though the scars, both physical and emotional, would remain. "I can finally sleep knowing he'll never hurt another family," she said afterward. The judge's final words to Ewing were sharp and cutting. "You took everything from this family, but you can never take their memory. Justice has caught up with you. If this story moved you, hit subscribe to hear more cases of justice finally being served." As Alex Ewing was led away in handcuffs, the courtroom remained silent, heavy with emotion. For the Bennett family's loved ones and the Aurora community, this was a victory, but one that came far too late. The decades of pain, unanswered questions, and fear had taken their toll. Vanessa, the sole survivor of the massacre, stood outside the courthouse and addressed reporters. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of everything she had carried since she was 3 years old. "I can't change what happened," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "But I can live for them, for my mom, my dad, and my sister. They deserve to grow old, to see me grow up. And now, I can honor them knowing he'll never hurt anyone again." The community rallied around Vanessa, a symbol of resilience and courage. Memorials for the Bennett family were held across Aurora, with candles lighting up the night in their memory. The story of the Bennett family murders is a tragic reminder of how evil can shatter lives in an instant. But it's also a story of resilience, justice, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Forensic advancements and the dedication of investigators finally brought closure to a case that had haunted Colorado for over 3 decades. Vanessa's journey is a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Despite losing everything, she found the courage to face her fears, testify against her attacker, and reclaim her life. Her story resonates deeply, not just as a tale of survival, but as a call to cherish our loved ones and seek justice for those who cannot speak for themselves. The Bennett family's memory lives on, not just in the hearts of those who knew them, but in the countless lives touched by their story. Their tragedy, though painful, reminds us of the importance of love, community, and perseverance. In the end, justice was served, but the scars remain. The Bennett family story will never be forgotten, a haunting reminder of the darkness that exists, but also of the light that can emerge through resilience and unity. Hold your loved ones close, for tomorrow is never promised. If this story moved you, remember to like the video, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories that uncover the truth and honor the victims. Check out another chilling crime story about family massacre and a narcissistic boyfriend who murdered his girlfriend on Halloween night. These stories will send shockwaves down your spine and keep you off your seat. Click it now to watch and learn how to protect yourself, loved ones, and community from deadly crimes in future. Thank you for watching. See you in another crime video uncovered tomorrow.